Okay, there we go. It's a small group. Norlene, how was your weekend?
It was good. It was good. I'm trying to think. Yesterday, we did like the pedal boats, but they have ones near me where they're giant flamingos, so kind of silly but fun. My husband and my oldest daughter, we did that. So that was kind of a fun little adventure. Not
Oh
quite
my
as
gosh.
relaxing. I've done that. I like the paddle boats too, the
Yeah,
boarding. So, but yeah,
that
it
sounds
was
really
fun though.
fun. Giant
Yeah.
flamingos. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. And nice to hang out with my oldest too, because we don't always get to spend so much, time with just her. So,
How
Yeah.
old is she, Norlene?
19.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So she has her own life and it's nice
Yep.
that yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. How
Thank
fun.
you.
Lots of water time for all of us.
Mhm.
Yeah. We were talking before you came in with Jesse about how we always say children are resilient, they'll bounce back. And I think in a way that's a dangerous statement
Mhm.
because it makes us forget
Mm.
Mhm.
that they don't just bounce back. They need the support to
Mm.
be able to
Yep.
bounce back.
Absolutely.
Um, I always read in between all the lines. I also saw a post on social media and somebody saying leadership is you empower, which I don't agree with empowerment, your your group to what did it say? It said something like to how to handle adversity and how to handle different situations. I said, not necessarily. That to me is not leadership. Leadership is not to teach people how to handle the adversities. Leadership is
Mhm.
really getting to know your team, to know what is going on that and what kind of support and help they really need. Not just, oh, we're having an adversity time. We're gonna maneuver it together. I mean, those says drive me crazy. I don't know about you. Maybe I'm just too picky in the language that is used, but I'm constantly overthinking all of that.
Mm. No, I think I agree. Maybe it's a bit of both, but I think that you can't maneuver anything together if you don't know people, like if you don't know what they need, where they're coming from, how they receive communication. It's actually what I wrote a lot about when we were looking through the lenses because of my particular role and change right now and just such like the importance of grounding with people and putting their humanity first before you like decide how you're gonna navigate the tumultuous education system that you might find yourself in. And yeah, I think I was just leaning back on like the importance of systems and pedagogy that we did this last year when we were reading through From Teaching to Thinking and how like those things have to intermingle with one another in order to be impactful or even like efficient in any sort of way.
Mhm.
They have to speak very clearly to one another. So you can't do that unless you know who's on your team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
your concern, Miriam, that it's just such a broad brush, like I empower you, and that's enough?
Yeah.
You you can do this, we can do this, that type of thing, and we're not really, like Jesse was saying, considering what people need and
And building relationships. I
Mhm.
think we live in a power over society. We
Mhm.
have the ones that I'm empowering you. And
Uh,
I don't necessarily believe that anybody has the right to empower me. I invite people to come to me and get to know me and build upon the strengths that they may identify, be my critical friend if it's needed, and guide me in moments when I ask for that guidance. I don't believe we have the power to empower, if that makes
Mm.
any sense.
yes, it does.
So it does bring us back to what we're talking about today, because that's all the whole idea of perspectives. Can we listen to each other's perspectives? And I think, have you had a time to look at the wonderful little handout I posted? I try to make them easy for you guys. Um, and I think one of the questions asked, what was one thing that completely changed your perspective? If you can share a story or some of your thinking or whatever is in your heart.
Well, I'm ready. I this book, which was brought to my attention from the studio, and maybe you're all familiar with it. I wasn't until recently, Embracing Challenges in Early Education by Pam Orkin Wright. Um, and I think you're mentioned in this book, Miriam.
Yeah.
But
I go
I
look my name up.
I'll have to look, or maybe it was Matt and in their responses they included your work as well in talking about it. But it's Flexible Protocols for the Thinking Teacher, and I just think that when I got my teaching credential years and years ago, the I think the message I got was the goal was to not have conflict, and that the organized, well systematic teacher that had all the systems in place and had everything organized, there wouldn't be conflict because you had everything so organized and everything would flow. And so and that conflict was a failing if there was conflict. And so this was so fabulous, so eye-opening that we want conflict, and that the well-versed teacher knows how to help the children and to learn with the children through conflict. And that if everything is always copacetic, what are you learning? So I'm just so grateful that that this book came my way through the studio, and I very excited to more and more in my classroom learn how to help children to learn with the children through conflict. So
It's interesting how the educational system has worked so hard at creating an unreal world.
yeah.
Conflict is part of life. I mean, I don't remember a day that I didn't have to maneuver some sort of conflict. And yet, especially with young children, we tend to sort of ignore the concepts of or the idea of conflict. And when there is conflict, we call it challenging behaviors and we put it back on the children. I often think about the language we use, like walking feet, use your words. They are so against the idea of helping and supporting children to really use language that will help them move forward. So it's fascinating, but I'm glad that happened and it has shifted your thinking, especially when you come from a perspective like I think in a lot of elementary, and I think you share you were in the elementary.
Right, 4 and 5 TK.
Okay. Are you in California?
Yes.
Okay. Geez, don't get me there, please.
Okay.
They don't really don't like me. Um, because I speak up. I mean, what's happening in TK in California is really concerning to me. We're just pushing curriculum down on these little ones,
Yeah.
and then we're managing them. And, some of them are still learning to use a potty. So
Absolutely.
it is a hard, but yes, it is that management thinking that comes in that we sometimes forget the human side. And I've always written and fought against that. So I am going to ask you a question in a little bit, but I want to hear from the rest of you. Something an encounter you had that changed your perspective, either personal or, personal perspective or educational perspective, whatever you want to share.
I can jump in, and I don't know that it's like one particular moment, but it was more like an ongoing process, probably maybe like 7 years ago or so. Working with my little ones in my class that were threes and fours, and we were doing books around social emotional learning, and it was going to be for my dissertation, but whatever. So it was stuff you normally do, right? That's important in the classroom and read alouds, and so, but I was really like focusing in a little bit more and just started doing some personal reading on my own around like issues of social justice and racism, and really made some personal shifts, and kind of always would have thought of myself as someone who believed in like equity and that sort of things, but just kind of understanding it better or more deeply, and moving away from like, I think I grew up well intentioned with like a color blindness kind of an idea with my parents, and like, and again, very well intentioned, but sort of just understanding the importance of acknowledging myself, but also of helping young children to, they're seeing the differences and to understand them and to embrace them. So, and that's really since then, kind of continued to develop and strengthen and influenced my work in in my classroom with my littler ones, as now I've started to work with college students. It's just something I think about a lot, kind of just that. I think more of an evolving than a switch, right? And realizing that like the social emotional work I was doing is still so very important and how intertwined that is with social justice, and how much you need that element in your social emotional work, or it's not going deep enough, and it can just be so surface level with young kiddos. So
Yeah. It's always wonderful when we can enter at it from a perspective of understanding,
Mhm.
how culture and race, ageism,
Mhm.
ableism, all the isms uh,
Mhm.
guide people to have different experiences, and
Mhm.
how sometimes we don't necessarily become aware of what we're doing. I mean, we can, like you say, I think everybody here, hi Jess, I
Hi.
I think everybody here is very well intentioned, but I sometimes also question, is well intentionality really pushing us to understand different views,
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
perspectives? Jesse, to
Right.
catch you up, we're just doing some sharing about that moment that we had, that where a different perspective changed our own perspective. So now it goes to Jess, and then catch up, catch your breath, and then I'll come to you.
Um, I think that if something from this last week, hmm, I think honestly, if I reflect back on what you just said, Miriam, about conflict being like a normal part of our existence, I'm walking into a space with Head Start where the team is really strained and they've had a really exhausting year with funding cuts and team changes and leadership changes. And so conflict is present, but also passive. So it can be kind of hard in this way. And so for me, I'm trying something new where I'm not letting it color like my overview or like what I'm seeing in people, but more like trying to be curious and understand what's happening, like what happened and where do we want to go, and bring a sense of like compassion and like gentle firmness that I think about when I'm working with kids, or my own daughter, like how do we guide this in a way that feels like it's okay to have discourse. Like we don't have to, it doesn't have to be this big upheaval just because we're having discourse about something.
Mhm.
And so I've been thinking a lot about how to bring that with me as a new leader in this space and how we want to model that here, because what we do here is the same thing we want to see happen with the kids that we're serving and the babies we're serving. And so
Mhm.
just really like centering myself around that, like even though I'm not in direct services, for the first time in a long time with kids, thinking like how much experience I have and how I can build that culture on my own team here now. So yeah, just shifting my perspective to be okay with the discomfort of the discourse.
Yeah. And my suggestion is reach out to your critical friends. I mean, I'll be glad to talk to you through things and moments. You can send me an email. I think, having worked with Head Start for a long time, I know how embedded the culture is, and I think Jesse can relate to this too. And we should probably share that one moment we had when we did that presentation, Jesse, without mention the program, because that was an eye opener for me. I mean, I come in and Jesse was with me that time, and I'm doing a presentation on loose parts. And I asked, what are the affordances that loose parts give children? And one of them took a clothespin, put it on her mouth, and says they cause pain. And I was numb. I think if Jesse wouldn't have been there, I wouldn't have known what to do. for the first time in all these years that I've been doing these big workshops with 500 people, I never had that happen. Where somebody saw the materials as dangerous in such a deep way that they would say the affordance was creating pain. So from that perspective, what I realized is that they didn't want to change anything that was already happening. That was me. Jesse, you want to add to that one because you were there. You saved me that day.
I don't even remember what I said, to be totally honest. It was one of those um moments that was very surprising because children will explore. I think that's kind of what I wound up saying is children will absolutely explore it in a multitude of ways, and they may try it on their body with a clothespin if they've never seen it before. But if it hurts, they'll probably take it off.
Yeah.
Right? And then it just surprised me, because it's something that I grew up seeing, right? Clothespins. So it wasn't a tool to me that was one that would be shocking. So when I talk about that I had used glass when I worked with infants, that I had glass in the classroom, that one I expect people to be like, how could you put glass around infants, even though studies show that they actually wind up being more careful with the exposure. So to have something as simple as a clothespin be so triggering for someone was really shocking. Um,
And I think in the long run, I mean, throughout that whole day, what I had come to realize was that the fear and the perspective was people are coming in telling us what to do, and they're not listening to us. We're not ready to make the changes. They were afraid of having to change everything. So, part of really understanding the perspectives that people bring in is knowing what they're doing within their ecosystems. If there's a lot of safety concerns, how do you begin by addressing those first? If there is pushback and anger, it's really taking the time to understand where that pushback and anger is coming from. Because until you cross those, the systems continue.
well, and you have to start with the leadership too, because I think in that same space that we were in, I found some of the um, leaders inside of those specific programs were very close to saying, you can't use these materials in Head Start, which I operate inside of a school that is part of Head Start. We have materials I bring are actually bought with Head Start dollars, and that's something I always like to share. So, it's well, you can, but you have to look at how it will work inside of your space. And I think the leadership inside of those specific centers, because each center inside of Head Start has its own culture. It's working with those leaders to help them feel comfortable, because then they can help their staff feel comfortable
Yeah.
too.
And in that moment, I don't think we were able to get anywhere because they were so entrenched that we needed to take a step back,
Yeah.
because then they started throwing licensing at us. Licensing doesn't allow me. And it's like, well, which licensing? Title 22 or Title 5? In California, we have both. And so you start noticing that their perspective, and it goes back to every perspective, until they're ready to receive that, they're going to have a very hard time moving
Mhm.
Yeah.
forward.
Well, and helping them understand that it's not licensing, it can be a center policy. Because
For
nowhere in
men.
licensing does it say children have to wear shoes. That's center policies, at
Mhm.
least in California, right? Like
Right.
varies state by state, but that's
I
own the
think it
policy. And that's
I think
something
it goes back to what we were talking about too, Miriam, is like knowing your people, right? And that's hard when you're presenting to a group that you don't know. Like that's gonna happen a lot. But like walking in and like really seeking to understand and observe and like put on that researcher hat or keep it on in my case. Like I didn't ever take it off because I'm gathering information to understand like where is the culture needing some tending and like where's the openness for that first shift, right? Like where is the work already happening and it just doesn't have language around it yet? And where is another place where it's like not happening at all? And thinking about how all of us here, but also like with Matt and Susan or with teaching preschool partners with Aaron Moulton, and like thinking about how all of us have this like shared vision, but we also have to like remember to pause and like get to know what's happening per what you were just saying, Jess. Like each site inside this big program is going to look and feel really different.
And it's going back to Ann Pellos and Margie Carter's book, From Teaching to Thinking. The whole idea of pedagogy is about analyzing thinking, the way we teach. And I think I mentioned this before, that we talk about in the Revisiting Journeys, is the idea of heutagogy, learners, giving the power of the learner, or not the power, but the control of the learners. We talk about this with children, give them the control of their own learning, or they're the protagonistas of their own learning. How do we do that with the adults that we work with as well? So that they can have the time to think and reflect together. And I think that is such a big piece that is missing in the work that we do. So who are your critical friends that you can go back to? You mentioned a few here. How can I turn these opportunities in ways that supports people to really create their own learning processes? And I am the most impatient human being that you have. I don't have patience for a lot of this. So how do we create even the time for that to happen? Be it in a college classroom where you're teaching the adults, or where you're working with other educators, or even with the young children. How do we shift our own perspective about time? So it's changing perspectives, not about the way we see things differently, but time is a big one. We all have a very different concept of time. I mean, I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico. If I go back to Mexico right now, I'd probably go crazy, because everything is so laxed. It's like, yeah, 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 I'll go take care of it today. And they never show up. And I'm like, or I'm always pushing to be on time is part of what I do. So understanding that not a lot of people follow that same sense of time has been a difficult perspective for me to sort of explore. So think about perspectives in different ways and different angles. And I think Norlene talked a little bit about the cultural issue, the perspective on race. So contextual. It's also important to understand perspectives. Jesse, do you want to share a moment where something really changed your perspective?
So mine's actually centered with a child.
Not the
So
poop explosion Diego had, right?
not, yeah, God. It's like on the neck too, because yeah. Anywho, let's not go there. Sorry, I was late. It was gross. Sometimes these things happen when Nana watches him the night before. He just, yeah. Um, Anywho, mine was not with my child. It was inside of the classroom. I had a child who wasn't really engaging with other children and kept wanting to go underneath the tables. And we couldn't figure out how to draw them into connecting with their peers because we could tell they wanted to, but they just weren't wanting to leave what they found as a cozy, comfortable space. So instead of trying to force them out from it, we had a whole conversation. My great critical friend, who's not with us here right now, but we talked about, well, what if we bring the children to them? So we turned underneath the table into a space for the children to explore. So instead of going a simple route of let's just put paper with the markers, we actually turned it into let's put the paper and put some goggles because this child did like to wear like different attire and dress up and take on new roles. So we put the goggles and we put actual paint with the paintbrushes so that if it dripped down, and it shifted so much for him because the peers were coming to him that literally the same day, later on in the day, he was out engaging with his peers instead of just hiding under the table. So it was just that whole realizing that people have a different way of approaching situations. And he found comfort in that space, but because his peers came into his comfort space, he now felt comfortable going to his peers. And it was one of those moments that really, for me, will always stick with me because it was slowing down and really seeing the child and figuring out how do I meet this child's needs and not impose my own view at the same time of what they should be doing, right? Like he doesn't have to come out from under the table. He can still engage with his peers there. So it's a different take on what we're talking about, but for me, it's the one when I think about perspectives that always comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an incredible story too, because how often we would just close the area. We will
Mhm.
cordon off and put caution tape and no, you can't go there. How often we close the loft because we don't want people to climb up the loft because we have a fear of they're going to fall. So even sometimes, when we talk about children are competent and we need to look at them as competent and creative, and what does it truly mean? And what is our perspective and understanding on the language that we constantly use? We use big languages, we use big words, but do we even take the time to sort of um, discuss the meaning and the perspective of what that means? When we talk about a child being competent, what does it truly mean to any of us? Do we understand it? And do we see it from different angles? I mean, I want to share mine, which is as an adult. I had done a lot of work around issues of culture, diversity, and privilege and oppression and racism and anti-racism. That's always been part of my core, in my work, because I come from a very wealthy, privileged background. Yes, I am from Mexico, but I have very different experiences growing up in a wealthy community. So for me, I had a hard time crossing over to the idea that classism is also part of the work that we do. Not everybody necessarily comes from the same background, and we may not be aware. So the perspective and the idea that I did not necessarily, we are all Mexican, but I didn't fit within a group of people. So I was attending a workshop with a wonderful leader in empowerment and privilege and oppression, Leticia Nieto. So if you ever have a chance to do that, please make sure that you look her up because she's fabulous. And she said, if you came from a country across the border, move to that side. Well, I came from a country from across the border, so I moved to that side. And then she looked at me and says, Marian, you sure you want to be on that side? And I said, yeah, well, I came from Mexico. I belong here. And then she started having the people there sharing their stories of how they came across undocumented and the struggles that they had to go through to come to the other side. I mean, I got red. My face became really, really red. And I said, may I move to the other side? And I did. And later on, she came back to me and said, that's why I wanted you to think about what you were doing. Because the reality is, my experience was never that of an undocumented person. It was never that of somebody who had to struggle to leave their home behind because they were feeling persecuted. And sometimes in our rush to blend in, we sort of forget the power of what it means to others. And I think we need to be aware of our own perspective about things before we enter that space where we can begin to listen to others. And I think that is the hardest truth. That's why I said, I don't know that it is about being well intentioned. We have good intentions, but the reality is until you question your intention, you will be in tension. It's all tension.
That whole idea of impact versus intention. I talk a lot with like my students about that and think about it myself too. Like regardless of what our intention is, the impact can be felt very differently. And then also to be able to take someone else's perspective and understand how it and try to understand how it might have impacted them, even if that's not what you intended.
Mm-hmm. And it's important for us to get there because unless I would have gone through this whole exercise, I don't think I always would have gotten there. And I would always seen myself, yeah, I am Mexican. I understand all the Mexicans that come to this world. When in reality, no, every individual person that crosses into this country, experiences are different. And I was in a way, I'm not necessarily, but I was privilege blind. So I had to unpack that. And that was not an easy process for me. It was painful. And I think that's one of the reasons why we don't want to spend time really unpacking our own way of being. And I think that's how systems have been created with the protective measure of what we're doing, so that we don't have to because the systems don't require it. Does that make any sense of what I just said? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's definitely uncomfortable to have to really examine, we've been saying, good intentions, and we all have to realize, oh, I came in with um, perspectives I didn't realize, and I better step back, and so it's uncomfortable. Absolutely, yeah.
And I mean, when we live in the white world, because I can pass in the white world without an issue, makes it harder.
Yeah. And then it's scary. Oh, sorry to interrupt. It's scary because then thinking, oh, I had I had ideas that I wanted to be a force of good in this world that I'm working, but can I be if I'm on the privileged side and people are seeing me maybe in a way I didn't realize because I didn't even see it myself? So can I be the effective person I thought I could be? That's a little scary. Yeah.
It is scary and it is painful.
Yeah.
Many ways it's painful to recognize that you're trying to be an ally, but you may not be going about it in the right way
Yeah.
or the way that they would appreciate and embrace.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, another piece that sort of breaks groups. It sort of creates that separation. So going back to perspective taking and the whole idea of democracy, of interdependence and independence, where else do you see that these issues of perspective may be breaking relationships or maybe separating rather than helping us come to a place where we can have conversation? Where else do you see that impact or tension existing? I'm asking you really deep questions today.
I guess we have to feel safe um, to really ask the deep questions, like Jessica, that story of you inviting the kids to paint under the table. That is so wonderful that you were so open to that. And I'm just asking myself, would I feel safe to do that in my classroom if the principal walked in and the kids are under the table? So we have to be brave but we're, yeah. And then if we don't feel safe in our community to make a brave choice like you did, then maybe that means I have to speak up more and explain what I'm doing beforehand so that I don't feel vulnerable making decision in the, a decision. So, yes, okay. So that's really mind opening. If I don't feel safe in my space, I am the one that has to proactively find a way
Great.
to be safe.
Yes.
Well, I'm thinking through like, okay, for opening up under the table, we thought about how many children realistically can fit under there comfortably. Um, so we tested it with our adult bodies where we like all went under to see like, do we have the space to move our arms or is it gonna collide with one another? So thinking through those pieces so that if you are questioned, like you mentioned, you can say what you've already done to test it and the safety precautions that you've taken to ensure that this space is intentionally designed, this experience has meaning and isn't just something, oh, we threw together to think, see if it would work to get this child out, right? Like there's layers that go with it, and I think being able to speak to that helps. Um,
I think also stepping back because I've seen people post and I've seen in programs that I visited where they do that and they said, oh, we're giving children a different perspective. But what Jesse did comes from a very different place. Jesse identified a situation that had to do with socio-emotional well-being. This is a child that needed or was asking or was not relating and understanding that and creating the circumstances. So if I was in a position where a principal would come in, I have plenty of DRDPs in California that I could slam, you know, to explain this is the reason why, because we're creating a culture of trust. And in order to do that, I have a child that needed to be able to trust that I was listening to their unspoken language many times, because children have unspoken language. So I think braveness also comes from humbleness, understanding, and being able to see children's thinking in a different way
and I
without,
want
go
Can I
ahead.
circle back to like children's thinking and the democracy piece that you kind of were mentioning?
Sure.
What came up for me was thinking about how sometimes we ask the children to problem solve, right? We have the children who there's like 20 cars and they all belong to them, right? But one child comes along and wants one and they pick one out and they're content. But sometimes we're tempted to say like, oh, you got to give them more. So who are we to necessarily say that to, right? Because if these two children have already agreed on a solution, are we honoring their voices and their perspectives if they think it's fair that this child has more cars than the other one? Does it have to be equal?
Equality is not equity.
Right. And are we then overruling their voice and saying that we have the power, therefore their voice and their solution that they created doesn't matter? We're just going to overrule it. Because if they've already taken the time to navigate this together, then, or do we then take this instance and open it up to the group as a whole and talk about it? What
Hmm.
do we see as a whole group as fair in quantity or in shared space and use of materials?
Yeah, I think that's another perspective that it needs to be considered, our concepts of sharing.
Yeah. And what do the children view as the solutions inside of that? I mean, there's always going to be one that's like, they all belong to me, right? Especially when you're working with twos. Everything is
Everything's
mine,
there.
why, and no.
Yeah. My daughter cannot shower because it's my granddaughter's bathtub. So that's the 2-year-old motto. But, when you understand it, you know that this is part of independence. This is part of stating who they are. The no's are healthy. I
Mhm.
like a child to say no because that tells me they know how to set up boundaries for themselves. It's part of the 2-year-old motto. It's a word that really helps them. Um, so, there's so many thoughts that are coming to me. Um, where do we want to go? Anybody?
Well, the question that you posed, how do we create space for different perspectives and disagreement and uncertainty in our classroom? I just think that's a great question, and I'd love to hear ideas about how to go about that more. Um,
Anybody wants to start before I do? And Jesse?
I think for me, before I moved roles, and I was teaching design and innovation for pre-K through fifth grade. And so it was a normal part of our sessions together, right? Like we were there to embrace uncertainty and instead of like seeking out specific answers to like see what happens and like really open up space for that curiosity through play. And so for me, building what I saw happen with the kids over the course of several years, especially one particular cohort, was a time and a space where they just had a lot more freedom to work on their inquiry by building and creating and like with no real specific outcomes per se. Sometimes, yes, but a lot of the times it was open to them. And what I saw build in them was language around, well, I don't know why that didn't work, but I'll try again. Or what are you building and like how does that work? Or like having conflict over materials and like working through that. And like with language guidance and our guidance, but over time it was a lot of us stepping back and like just seeing those like muscles that had been built for them. And so I think building in time where they just have the opportunity to practice, I think is the best way, like really regularly. And then teachers would take what we were doing and bring it into their classrooms, and they would build it into their like choice time and things like that because they knew the kids, instead of just having stations, which are great, wonderful, but they would have that building area because the kids who really needed that practice the most would be so drawn to it, right? To like be working through their problem solving. So I think that's one of the coolest ways you can do it. There's a million of them, but I think being able to create that unhurried time for them is a lot of what I come back to with adults too. But since you asked about kids, yeah.
You know, something that came as I was listening is this idea of what would happen if the outcomes are for us as adults and not for children?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that really shift an whole educational system? We always put outcomes on children. They're not meeting the outcomes. Is it their children that are not meeting the outcomes, or we need to actually put the outcomes on us?
Mm.
Just a thought. You know, I very seldom see that or hear that. For instance, a child, if I go back to the DRDPs, and I haven't looked at that instrument in a long time, but this whole thing with socio-emotional learning, I call it socio-emotional control because that's basically what it has become. But if we want children to be happy, what does it mean to be happy? You know, it's going back to understanding what an outcome truly is. We want a child to be able to relate to each other or to share with each other. Well, your understanding of sharing is very different than mine. So, are they really not sharing, or what would it be if we said more like, let's set up an adult outcome and say, how do we create the conditions so children can negotiate with each other? That would give you a whole different way for children to interact.
I think
Yeah.
too, like because there was no outcomes in that particular space per se. I mean, they kept trying to drive them forward, which is part of the reason I am here now in my new role is like it was just so outside the realm of like what I was hoping to continue is like it was up to me to set up the space, right? It was up to me to observe them while they were in there. It was up to me to listen, to like improve and iterate for the next time and then see what happens and identify things as the adult. Like, what do I notice is hard? Like, what is not working? What are they working on? What are they working through that I can support. And I had that luxury, I think, per se. Like I didn't have any standards that I needed to meet or anything like that. And that's kind of what I mean. And when I'm saying that unhurried time of like, kind of lives outside the realm of those standards that maybe already exist.
Right. And the standards were probably being met. They
Yeah.
just probably needed to be chronicled and articulated because I'm a firm believer of that.
I like to contrive situations that force them to see other perspectives too. Um, so it's things that can be as simple as voting, right? But voting with intention, because oftentimes we invite them to vote and we'll just tell them to like raise their hand. And so then they raise their hand multiple times, right? Because they look around and they see what their peers are voting for and they change their vote. But that's not really how voting works, right? So we had little like popsicle sticks that had the children's name on it and a picture of them, and they'd use those, and we'd have like buckets set up in the front. So let's say when we were creating our community garden, we had to vote on a name for the garden. So everybody shares an idea of what they want that name to be. We took notes on it. And then over the series of like 2 weeks, we narrowed down. So we voted first to get to our top five. So each name had its own bucket, and we had a picture that represented what that looked like. And then we narrowed it all the way down to one, and the teachers voted too, right? And each child gets to come up individually and vote, and you get one vote, and we talk about that too. So then if their idea wasn't the one that was selected, there's a conversation piece there, right? Where we can talk about that. How did that make you feel? Why do you think that way, right? What is this bringing up for them too, so that they start being open to other people's ideas and seeing that sometimes other people's ideas are the direction that we might go. 'Cause that's something that happens in a work setting too, right? Or in life in general. Our ideas aren't always the ones that are picked. So I love to use voting because it opens up that whole democratic perspective. And then you can take it too into when they're having things like the disagreements, let's say about the cars. I remember we had like four snails. Now, something to know about me, I like don't like creepy crawlies, so it's tough for me when they're like really into the bugs. I have to be like, yeah, right, great. So we had like four snails, and they were kind of arguing over who got to keep the snails. And so we brought that conversation to our meeting time and said, okay, so we have four snails, and there's 12 of us. And all 12 of you are curious about the snails and want a space to use them. So, what does that look like? How do we do this? How do we ensure that the snails are still being honored and not harmed when we want to engage with them? Because it's important we take care of our bodies. We have to take care of our snail friends' bodies as well. So we take their ideas and synthesize it and come up with our agreements of how would we use this. So they came up with, like they'd split the snails apart, and there would be like two snails in one space and two snails in the other. And then that way they could then change up who's going to see the snails. Um, I did not, thankfully I had a co-teacher who will touch the snails, and I was like, I'll change every diaper. Just please be the one to move them. But just those conversations. I also once worked with a colleague that she actually just did this whole study into like the rights of bugs, because they were having in her class, she was in the pre-K class, they were having a lot of children who were taking the bugs and then like bringing them in from home or even from the outdoors, and like they're dying, right? So they'd bring them in and put them in their cubby and they die. So it opened up this whole conversation about like what are the rights of bugs, and that's how she and I were talking about it. And she's like, did you know roly polies have a whole like familial system which I had no idea, right? Because again, the creepy crawlies. Even the roly polies for me, I'm like, oh, but I try. So, I mean, they had a whole conversation where there were different camps of thought from the children of it's okay as long as you bring them back at the end of the day, or no, it's not okay to take them at all because what if they're the mommy roly poly and their babies are gonna miss them, right? So they had to really navigate this, and it took a long time. Like, it's not done in one day, it's many conversations over time, which also helps them see that sometimes solutions
Mhm.
take time and understanding others' ideas take time to digest. And we say, okay, we'll come back to this. Because it's something we do as adults. So, kind of giving them that tool out the gate is helpful. And I think it does lend itself, idealistically, probably, I mean, but I think it lends itself to hopefully this next generation of children that we do this work with coming up and being open and enjoying lively conversation and viewing different perspectives as an opportunity for growth and understanding as opposed to something like negative, right? It's dialogue. That's what it is. So that's
And
how I went about it. That was a really long answer, sorry.
you were gonna say something, and or you're okay.
Oh yeah, no, I'm great. No, thank you. That is all so wonderful, and it. I think the bottom line it just boils down to, as you said, Jesse, unhurried time, taking the
Mhm.
time to reflect and talk through. So that's wonderful, right? I can. There's so many points. So like you said, there's so many points in the day for that. It's just stopping and taking it and revisiting. So
And I think
thank you for
that's
that.
one of the pieces I love about the parallel journeys,
Mhm.
coming back and saying to the children, and we adults just had this conversation.
Mhm.
And we all had different views, different perspectives, and this is how we negotiating them. So it sort of connects the whole educational purpose with the children and the adults. We as adults need to engage into that parallel journey. Otherwise, we're just following a curriculum that can be there in our head or has been handed out to us without any thinking behind it. It's just designed to meet goals or outcomes. And how do we have the courage to say to your principal, hey, this is what I'm doing and this is how it's happening? And who are collective friends and critical friends that we can bring into the conversation to help us do that? So this is hard work. Norlene, anything you feel like you want to add? We have like 3 minutes left.
No, I think that those are just like, I agree. I love hearing everyone's kind of different perspectives and stories. And I think even in finding that time, right? And as the adult in the room too, because I know sometimes like you want to do it, but in your own mind, you feel all those pressures. So doing that for yourself too, because it's when you slow down that then, children figure out all those, they find those interesting creepy crawlies or they make really like fascinating observations or ask those questions that like get you really thinking and moving forward. So
Yeah.
I think it really, Norlena reminds me, I keep hearing it, like how do we change our perspective about time? Like that was the phrase that stuck out to me today of where do we place value and why? And like, how do we change our perspective around those values of our time with the kids or our time with our teams or our students? And um, yeah, just continuing to evaluate that as a person.
That's your next professional development. There you go. Our
'cause
perspective of time.
I think you hear that a lot. Like those are nice ideas, but we don't have time for that. And especially like I struggle a lot, like because I'm teaching students that most of them are going to probably teach elementary. They're not going to teach the littles. That's a whole nother conversation, right? So they like think that the things I'm telling them and that we're engaging and doing are cute. They don't see like how they can still incorporate that, right? Like that there won't be time. So trying to kind of make the connections for them and how they can still bring it in. So
So, just one thing I'll leave you with is this idea, never end a meeting with agree to disagree. end the meeting by saying, we'll come back and continue our conversation, because agreeing to disagree means I'm going to continue to do what I want. And I don't care about what you're going to do. You're going to do what you want. And there's never going to be a conversation. The other one, we always try to reach consensus, and eventually that doesn't work either, because you're still going to have the child who's didn't get their name. So there's still emotions that need to